On the fateful summer night of June 3rd the 4th, 1989, the world watched in horrified disbelief as the Chinese government launched a brutal crackdown on student-led protests in Beijing's iconic Tiananmen Square. The massacre of unarmed civilians sent shockwaves across the globe, prompting widespread condemnation and casting a dark shadow over China's international reputation. The question that continues to haunt historians, political analysts, and human rights activists is, why did China massacre the students at Tiananmen Square? To understand the motivations behind the bloody crackdown, one must delve into the socio-political climate of China at that time. The protests in Tiananmen Square, which initially began as a gathering of students mourning the death of reformist leader Hu Yaobang, swiftly transformed into a mass movement demanding political reform, freedom of speech, and an end to government corruption. The sheer scale of the protests and the fervor of the demonstrators sent ripples of anxiety through the ruling Communist Party of China, CPC. At the heart of the matter lay deep-seated fears within the CPC leadership about the potential destabilization of their one-party rule. The protests in Tiananmen Square had galvanized not only students but also intellectuals, workers, and ordinary citizens disillusioned with the government's lack of accountability and transparency. The Chinese leadership, under the stewardship of paramount leader Deng Xiaoping, viewed the protests as an existential threat to the party's grip on power. This perception fueled a sense of urgency and paranoia within the highest echelons of the CPC. Furthermore, the specter of the Cultural Revolution, a period of mass socio-political upheaval and violence in China from 1966 to 1976, loomed large in the collective memory of the CPC leadership. The trauma and chaos unleashed during that tumultuous decade had left indelible scars on the nation, and the leadership was determined to prevent a recurrence of such widespread social unrest at all costs. The fear of losing control and descending into a state of perpetual turmoil became a driving force behind the decision to quell the protests with brute force. Adding to the complexity of the situation was the divergent views within the CPC leadership itself. While some advocated for a more conciliatory approach and dialogue with the protesters, hardline factions pushed for a swift and unequivocal show of strength. This internal power struggle and conflicting advice to Deng Xiaoping exacerbated the sense of indecision and unease at the highest levels of government. The confluence of these factors set the stage for the tragic events that unfolded in Tiananmen Square. As the protests swelled in size and momentum, the leadership grappled with the daunting prospect of losing control over the narrative and the trajectory of the nation. In the early hours of June 4th, 1989, the Chinese government made the fateful decision to unleash the People's Liberation Army on the unarmed demonstrators, resulting in a brutal and bloody crackdown that shocked the world. The aftermath of the massacre saw a widespread crackdown on dissent, with thousands of arrests, disappearances, and a climate of fear and censorship enveloping the country. The international community responded with outrage and sanctions, isolating China diplomatically and economically. The events at Tiananmen Square became a defining moment in modern Chinese history, leaving an indelible scar on the nation's consciousness and shaping its trajectory in the decades that followed. In conclusion, the massacre of students at Tiananmen Square was driven by a lethal combination of fear, paranoia, and the overarching imperative of the CPC leadership to preserve its monopoly on power at any cost. The trauma of the Cultural Revolution, the specter of widespread social upheaval, and internal divisions within the government coalesced to precipitate a violent and tragic denouement. The echoes of that fateful night continue to reverberate through China's present-day reality.